This is about very relevant for today's society, I feel, about social media usage and intergroup relations, why increased usage leads to decreased peace, and how to curate truly inclusive spaces. And the question asked here was, does more communication online associate with more violence offline when members of these groups meet later in the real world? And to conduct this study, the authors looked at three measures that are helpful for studying intergroup relations and online intergroup conflict, which are sentiment, integrative complexity, and online incivility, which is toxicity. And the sentiment is a broad indication of how positive or negative a certain post or comment is. Integrative complexity quantifies the ability of an individual to think and reason with input from multiple perspectives. And then online civility, toxicity, is defined as a measure of how likely a comment is to make someone leave a conversation, with comments defined as being rude, disrespectful, or unreasonable, being more likely to receive a higher toxicity score. I'm sure that we've all seen this on, if we're on Facebook or, wherever. It's you see this all the time. So this group collected conversations taking place once certain political events, which they looked at 25 right-wing protests, marches, or rallies were identified. And they collected these conversations using this Facebook graph application program interface. The results from this were that they found that after running these tests, the authors realized the level of outgroup engagement on Facebook event pages was the variable most consistently associated with both the presence and the degree of violence during a subsequent encounter between the groups. And the Facebook event pages used by these groups to gather support for marches and all of that are often where this online outgroup engagement occurs, where it's a lot of more rude, disrespectful, a lot of outgroup, a lot of times dehumanization. And with 32% of overall conversation across all of these pages being this kind of outgroup talk, outgroup engagement. Or actually, no, they say here it's over conversation across all pages occurring between members of opposing groups. And so, which again, further, I mean, if you've seen the Facebook groups kind of get out of hand, you know that dehumanization happens there all the time. There's not a lot of place for civil argument or discourse or healthy conflict. And so they concluded here that uncivil disagreements between groups on social media are associated with and can statistically predict violence when these groups meet in the real world. And Anupriya related this to the workplace by the importance of curating intergroup proximity carefully. Just like social media, workplaces also consist of employees from different backgrounds. And so this paper kind of shows one way that, or the way the interaction curated online can create to unfavorable outcomes offline. With the quote here, social media platforms are failing to facilitate positive outgroup engagement between these antagonistic groups. The superficial and hasty nature of group interactions is likely to reinforce pre-existing prejudices, generate negative affective states, and even lead to a situation where groups co-radicalize and polarize their views through unsavory contact with one another. So the importance of this, related to the workplace is, organizations should make sure not to have, just these superficial and hasty interactions with employees, but actually investing in inclusive, meaningful, rich, consistent, and purposeful interactions as well. So I found this study pretty interesting, not too surprising. I don't know if you both have seen the Social Dilemma before. It's a Netflix film or documentary that talks kind of all about how the algorithm of social media, of different social media outlets, just feeds people the same information over and over and over, which kind of keeps you digging in your own rabbit hole and creates this intergroup conflict because you have different realities. And I think that's obviously seen here to a degree.
Yeah. And that's, this just feels so accurate. And I have people kind of on like, I think of Facebook who are on different sides of the political spectrum, but there's a select few people on both sides who are just so down, like you said, down that like rabbit hole of like this is only like this, their scope is just so closed off to anything else. And I know for some people it definitely does impact their real world encounters, how they'll treat people if they know that they don't fall into the same bucket. I mean, outside of, politics, but there's people, if you don't fall in that same bucket, you instantly are just viewed as something different. I think that that's very, I mean, it's an excellent point. And as you mentioned, I think, the idea of just having more inclusive, meaningful interactions. I mean, that goes across the board for intergroup conflict, I think, and on trying to improve situations and avoid them. But especially in workplaces, I think that's so important. Um, and bridging the gap too, I wonder, on kind of like shared identity as well, not just having those inclusive conversations, but trying to bridge the gap so people see that they are alike in some
Yeah.
way or another.
Yeah. They have like, there's organizations out there that do that kind of thing. That's like, where it's just, you go on retreats with people of, two different groups kind of go on retreats with each other, and have this process where they're able to talk, with civility to each other. And, compared to something that's online, it's obviously there's a pretty obvious, there's a different barrier there that's not, in person versus online. But I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing, so like when you go to the event page, I mean, they already know, okay, like either these are the people that think like me, this is my tribe, this is my group, or they already know, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to aggravate, I'm going to throw some things out there, I'm going to antagonize. And so, I mean, even though it's online, it's still kind of like, I don't know, like a gang, a clubhouse, you know, where then
Yeah.
you get the same mentality like, well, we're a group now, so we're strong and we're powerful and we can say all these things. And a lot of times they will express things like on those particular pages that wouldn't necessarily just express on their own timeline or feed because they feel empowered because they were in the group.
Right.
And that makes me think of the threat concept too, and what's studied a lot in intergroup conflict is that a lot of the retaliation or violence or things come from like a threat to your in group that you feel you have to protect it. And it inherently makes you so unwilling when things get kind of more radicalized that you have trouble really viewing the other person's humanity or the other side's humanity. You have trouble thinking of them as anything other than a threat to the things that you hold near and dear. And I think that that's, so they go in these groups and they look for these like-minded people to help reinforce that almost. But it's, it's so dangerous in a sense because it really just keeps you focused on one aspect of things. And I think it definitely translates to the real world in a lot of ways for people. Um, it's just not a good thing to get so focused on that in-group identity. Uh,
Yeah. It's it's interesting. You mentioned the threat aspect of it because, um, like social media, being online, I feel like uh, removes the idea of consequences to getting into conflict with other people. Whereas in person, you have individual consequences if you decide to argue with someone, or fight with someone. Like there's consequences. But if you do this online, you can just log off and you're done for the day, kind of a thing. And there's no individual consequences. There's collective and social consequences to this happening at a on a large scale. But it makes it so much easier to just engage in that and just focus on proving other people wrong rather than trying to listen, because there's no consequences to getting into conflict.
That's true.
yeah, social media perpetuates a lot of it because you think of these groups and the lack of consequences. And you know, in the real world, these people probably don't only interact with people who think like them, right? Like you have neighbors and coworkers and all kinds of people who probably don't think like you. But this leads you, you know, it kind of puts you in a space where you almost think that that's the way the world should be, that you should, you know, only be with these people who are like-minded. It's interesting. But I think the consequence thing is really big. Yeah, if you have no consequences, these people don't care. So.
But one thing I've seen, and I've seen it in actually people that, you know, I've come to know pretty well, is that they will begin to identify with the group for one or two issues. You know, they'll have one or two things that they align with the group on. And so then, okay, well, then this is my group. But then, you know, the group begins to do all these other things that ordinarily, you know, they would be opposed to, but then they've already identified as the group and they don't know how to get back. They don't know how to walk it back.
Yeah. And at that point, I mean, I guess that's where maybe like a coach or somebody could come in and help with that, but it's hard to retract it. I don't, yeah, you make a really good point there.